Hello world! Those of you who follow this channel will know that recently I had a bit of a crisis computer wise. Around about 2017 I retired from teaching early and used some of my pension funds to buy a rather I was hoping, future-proof Mac that would stave off any kind of upgrade itches and stuff like that for years and years to come. And in the end, I bought an iMac with a 3 TB flash drive, 32 gigs of RAM, and a 4.2 gig quad-core i7 processor. At the time, it was the top iMac, spec'd out to, I think with the exception of the RAM, which I could have got 64 gigs. It was, as much as you could possibly get. As happens, technology improves year on year on year, and your equipment's ability to cope with it dwindles and dwindles and dwindles. I had an issue, as followers will know, where I had to replace the 3 TB flash drive. And then the whole thing just completely died one morning. It was a Sunday morning. I'd left the computer unused for a day, came into the lounge, wanted to put some music on while I was doing some baking, and just spent the next 3 or 4 hours on my knees and on the phone to Apple support, wondering why this thing kept going through a kernel panic over and over again. That really is the signal that really your computer's dead. I did remember, and I checked my policies, but on my home contents policy, because the original Mac had cost the earth and then a bit more, I had actually itemized it on my contents insurance. And that gave me a little bit of leeway to think, well, actually, the insurance people might pay out. Now, the process was very long and drawn out, but I do give myself a little bit of credit for hanging in there, because the first person that I spoke to on the end of a telephone was like a Rottweiler guarding the desk. And basically that Rottweiler is always going to say, no, go away. But having, continuing the conversation, whatever, he did agree that yes, you can send it away to our assessors and they will sort it out for you. Here's their number and they'll be in touch. So I did speak to the assessment people that same day. In fact, they agreed to look at my machine and decide whether or not it was a repair job, whether it was a replace job. Which sounded a lot more promising, I have to say, than the first person on the end of the telephone. Yeah, I do think though somehow that a lot of, because there's so many people involved in making a claim, one of whom is the courier that's going to come and collect this thing. I'm grateful that I chose a courier, because I didn't want to pack it in Hannah's suitcase again and take it somewhere myself, which I could have done. I could have taken it to an Apple store. They could have generated a report and then sent it off to the insurers themselves. But I think, I'm glad I didn't, even though the excuse that the couriers had to come and pick this thing up and take it to the assessors was the couriering firm does not have enough of the kind of boxes that iMacs need to go into for them to be able to take them. So you might be waiting a while. So I waited a week or so, and I phoned them up again, and I was given the same story. It's a ridiculous story, really. You're talking about a glossy blue plastic box with a little bit of sort of wire tying up things to keep it secure, and a bit of sponge inside. That took nearly 2 weeks, I think, before somebody sent me a very cryptic message at about 11 o'clock in the evening saying something about have your package ready. Not a day or a time when it's arriving, just have your package ready. I told him about the cryptic message and the long wait. His reply was the systems. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong. And then again, another long wait while it was in a queue, waiting to be dealt with. I got a phone call though, very encouraging phone call, saying, I've priced this up at nearly X thousands of pounds, which wasn't actually far off what I'd paid for the original Mac in 2017. I was absolutely spellbound. The issue, the snag was that then they still had to get the underwriters to agree to it. So that took a lot of coming and going. More weeks. But eventually, I got a phone call saying they've agreed to replace it. We're going to pay you blah, blah, blah. I.e. nearly iMac price. Minus excess. Well, the excess is 150 quid. You know, I know it's a huge excess, but in the scheme of things, it isn't. And it's meant that I've been able to go shopping for a new iMac. Okay, so I'm going to take you over to the Mac Store website now. I'm going to try and sort of do a couple of things, kind of make this a bit of a buying guide, even though in a few weeks there are going to be upgrades on here. It doesn't look like the overall changes are going to be very significant. They're basically spec bumps. I think the M2 processors will get upgraded to M4s. There might be an M4 iMac, although the M3 iMac's only been out for a year, so they may leave that for a later announcement. But I hope that basically what sort of comes along is informative. It just gives you a little bit of insight into what I did when I went shopping for an iMac. Oh, thank God he's got rid of that awful background. Right, well, world, here I am. This is the state of play for Apple as of October 2024. In fact, it's October the 20th, I think, I do believe. Yep, it's the 20th of October today. It's all likely to change very soon. They usually do a worldwide developers conference or big event, whatever. So if we look at the choices that we have here, now I'm not really into laptops as such. I don't do a lot of mobile computing. If I do, it's just a mobile phone or at most my iPad. But my iPad is really just for basic sort of browsing and stuff like that, you know, having a lie in or whatever. And so really a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro are not really, you know, my choices as such. For photo editing, for TV watching, even for logic editing. For me, having the large screen of the iMac is what I value, okay? But what I will show you while we're here, MacBook Air, just have a quick squint here. Let's just choose buy, because then it will show you your options. Okay, so you have a choice between a 13-inch and a 15-inch. But if we look at the 13-inch, there's the one with an M2 chip. That is outgoing. It's last year's MacBook Air. You have two choices here, which can be specified and bumped up. But if we look at the 13-inch with the M3 chip, this in laptop form is exactly the same specifications as you can get on the iMac, okay? The iMac is basically a MacBook Air with a large screen. I'll come back to the iMac in a minute, but what I want to do first of all is say a couple of words about the Mac Mini and the Mac Studio, because the Mac Mini to me looks like it's an absolutely wonderful thing, and I was very tempted by it. So if you just click buy there, these two, the first and second model, seem to me to be exactly the same thing, but just different ways of specifying them. And as you can see, it's an M2 chip. That's last year's M2. They didn't upgrade it to an M3. They're expected to upgrade it to an M4 this year if the rumour sites and things are anything to go by. But these two are the same thing. They do offer more ports, which for Apple is actually quite good. You've got a couple of USB-A ports, which I absolutely love. You've got a couple of Thunderbolt 4 ports. You don't appear to have an SD slot, which annoys me, but at least you've got 2 USB-A ports. But if you look, the only significant difference is 256 gigabytes of storage as opposed to 512 gigabytes of storage. What? It is absolutely insane. And wherever you look, at whatever model you look at, they always start you out with an insanely stingy amount of RAM and storage. And by the time you do get to useful amounts of RAM and storage, suddenly the price has gone up significantly. And given that this is a computer model which you need to buy a monitor, a keyboard and a mouse for, you suddenly end up spending an awful lot of money. I do find the idea of a Mac Mini quite tempting. However, I don't think that I could have done it in the budget of my insurance payout and be able to then get enough storage. I need little add-on-y bits for extra ports and stuff like that. And no, it wouldn't work. Although I can see that there are benefits from having a separate computer box, as it were, and a screen that are separate as well. Because that way, if one goes, you can replace that easier than having to necessarily buy a whole new thing, which, you know, could end up costing more money in the long run. But as I say, the prices of extra RAM and extra storage here are insane. But, and we'll waddle over to the iMacs here to sort of show you the next couple of points. Right, these iMacs are really cool. You've got a lovely choice of colours here. Again, you've got 3 apparently different models. You know, now that we're sort of on Apple Silicon, Apple have really got less to sell you. So here, again, they're showing you 3 different grades of model. But actually, there really are only 2. This is what they call a binned M3 computer. If you notice, the CPU is the processor that does the job. It would be the equivalent of, you know, an Intel i5 or Intel i7 or whatever. I'm not, you know, saying necessarily the capacity and the power of it, but, you know, in terms of describing it, where you see something like Intel such and such a chip, that's the CPU. Okay, the GPU is the graphics card, the graphics capability. Once upon a time, when I bought my first ever Mac, it was a MacBook, 13-inch black MacBook. It had Intel integrated graphics that basically didn't need a separate graphics card or anything. They were integrated onto the motherboard and they were always derided. But now they're putting the graphics and the RAM, as it were, all on the same chip. You cannot change that once you've bought it. So given that you are going to be living with this thing for 5, 6, 7 years, you best get it right to start with. For a start, 8GB of unified memory, Apple, it is so stingy. It really is so stingy. But look, we have a major difference here. This GPU, this graphics card, between the next two models, which are the same model, models 2 and 3 here, are the same thing, just specified out differently. But that 10-core GPU here means, I mean, I'm not a great gamer or anything like that. It doesn't bother me, really, whether, you know, fast frame rates and stuff like that. I am bothered about Logic's ability to redraw the screen in time with my music. So that graphics card is important there. It's also important because you get an extra fan with the 10-core model. There is one fan in this model here. There are 2 fans in here. I haven't ever heard them, by the way. Apple would rather their computers got a bit warmer rather than bring the fan in. And I don't know why that is. I mean, it's absolutely insane how quiet these things absolutely are. You just don't know that they're even on when they're working. I haven't heard this under a majorly huge load yet, and I've had this for several weeks now. The 8-core GPU though tends to be that because it's only got one fan, when it does get under loads, it would rather slow the performance down than overheat or switch the fan on. So you do get what they call thermal throttling there, where it will slow down a fair bit if you're overworking it. The other difference between this one here is that you've only get 2 Thunderbolt USB 4 ports. Given that Apple are so stingy with their ports anyway, as are, you know, what Apple did yesterday, Windows and Microsoft and all the other computer manufacturers will do tomorrow. We're already seeing high-end computers in the Microsoft Windows realm of things that are putting these systems on chips so that you don't get any chance of upgrading them. I like it because it makes things a lot faster. I mean, this computer is insanely fast when it wants to do anything. You know, I will render this video in iMovie in a little while and it'll take 2 minutes. I used to have to wait like 20 minutes or so even to save a video in QuickTime, let alone render a movie in iMovie. So, you know, it is insanely fast. But the downside is things like the ports. You don't get a gigabit Ethernet socket either on the first one. You can specify a gigabit Ethernet one. The gigabit Ethernet, by the way, is the actual socket is in the power supply brick, and you can specify the base model to have that for a few extra quid. I think it's worth it. It's not a portable machine. Why be wireless when you can be wired? Okay, you don't get Touch ID with the keyboard on the first one either. And so once you've put in storage, unified memory, these can't be specified as high either. You can only specify the binned version, as it were, with 16 gigs of RAM, whereas both of these can be specified up to 24 gigs because they're the same computer essentially. This one can only be specified with up to 1 terabyte of SSD space, whereas these two can be specified up to 2 terabytes, although why you would is totally beyond me. 256 gigabytes of storage is, as I've said, insanely miserly. It really is. When they do these great Apple events and you have these, play Baldur's Gate 3 or a game like Myst. If you want to play Baldur's Gate 3, you need 150 gigabytes just to store the scenery. So once you've got an operating system, a few bits of other software on there, you've installed a game on there, and that's everything gone out of your 256 gigabytes of storage. 512 gigabytes of storage, I'd say, is manageable if you're someone like my friend Hannah, who doesn't really store large files, doesn't really work with video or anything like that, but does a lot of tuition via Zoom, makes learning resources and stuff like that. 512 gigabytes for her is really ample. But I chose a terabyte of storage. I have got Logic Pro on here. I have got my Adobe Photoshop and Lightroom software on here. Although I'm having separate thoughts about that, but we'll come back to that another day. So I chose a terabyte with 16 gigabytes of RAM. And that makes your, what was originally a fairly reasonable price for an all-in-one system, suddenly go through the roof. Thankfully, with my insurance money, it supported it. It also supported me getting a couple of SSD drives externally. I've got a 2 terabyte and the 4 terabyte one. The 2 terabytes one is for my photos from Lightroom, from my main camera. Obviously, if I take a photograph on my iPhone, that goes into the cloud somewhere. I'm not bothered about that. But when I'm doing serious photography, I do actually want to be able to work with raw files. I want somewhere to store those raw files, and I don't want it to be clogging up my precious 1 terabyte, because 1 terabyte of storage really isn't much these days. So I've got a 2 terabyte disk. I've got a 4 terabyte disk for Time Machine. What is Time Machine? I don't know if we can show you. Yep, Time Machine is this little icon up here. Connect an SSD, make sure that it's bigger than the amount you want to back up, make sure it's turned on and configured correctly, and that way it's constantly backing your system up so that you never lose anything. As I say, Apple haven't really got anything to sell you these days. It's these machines are insanely good. But whereas before, this one on the left here, as I say, would be a heavily dumbed down, the most ridiculously low powered iMacs would be on this side, just so that someone could say, I'm a Apple person, as once happened in The Simpsons. We're all Apple people. These two would be your serious ones here. You'd perhaps have a lower spec graphics card in this one, a higher spec graphics card in this one. This one would be able to accept higher speed processors, whatever. And now, basically, they've got two. The Mac Studio, again, let's buy one of those. This is a Mac Mini on steroids with, finally, look how much money you've got to spend before you get a simple little card to stick your blooming SD card in from your camera. And look, it's even on the front where you can actually reach it and get to it. Oh my Lord, praise the Lord. 2 USB sockets on the front as well. Wow. It's got more around the back. But look, it's just it's absolutely insane, isn't it? You'd think that, those, if you were a power user a power photographer, for example, for whom that slot is designed, those power photographers will be using cards that are way more advanced than the humble SD card. The SD card was great technology 20 years ago. Memory cards technology has moved on one heck of a long way. You know, again, you've got all of the issues with keyboard, mouse, monitor. But basically, there is only one Mac Studio. They're showing you two here. But when you look at speccing them up, let's select that one, for example, you then have all of the chip things here, the processors, which here essentially will take you up to, well, actually, we'll do it there, okay? Will take you to the same price as the one on the right, as it were, the M2 Ultra. And again, we're still on the M2s. I think we'll get M4 Ultras in a few weeks' time. So now is possibly not a good time to buy unless you're absolutely desperate for a computer and you're in a situation like I was in where you've had a failure or something like that. My thoughts then on the new iMac that I've got. I'm extremely pleased and grateful to be able to have it. I think, you know, thank goodness for the insurance company. That's all I can say. B, it's absolutely great. There were issues really in how he priced up, because he went through all the what's it's with me, you know, and the logic of how he priced up basically, you know, what I would be able to claim from them. And, you know, it really sort of boils down to the fact that there isn't a Mac, because they have to give you like for like, you see. There isn't a Mac with an Intel processor in it anymore for sale anywhere. All right. So he was looking at the iMacs. There isn't an iMac with 3 terabytes of storage. And in fact, you know, had, I suppose, there been an option with 4 terabytes of storage, he might well have priced that up as well. But he priced up the Mac and then 2 terabytes as sold by Apple with a couple of hundred in for an external drive, basically. And then, as I say, they took their excess off of that. And then I basically went shopping with it online and bought the one that I wanted, essentially, which was, as I say, 1 terabyte of hard drive space, 16 gigs of RAM, which I think is gonna last a long enough time. Apple have been offering 8 gigabytes as base spec since time immemorial for a good 10 years or so. Their minimum spec has been 8 gigabytes of RAM. While they're still offering 8 gigs as their minimum, it does make sense to just go up a little bit. And because it's on a chip, I think it appears to be faster than my 32 gigs that I had before. Everything on here is extremely snappy. The screen is absolutely to die for. Now again, you see this is actually a step down from the 27-inch iMac that I had. This is a 24-inch iMac. It's 4.5K resolution, whereas the 27-inch was 5K, but it actually, I think, looks better. The white bezels around it divide opinion, but for me, the thing that sort of annoys me slightly, and it's only a tiny little niggle slightly, is that you haven't got an Apple logo on the front of it, which you always had, I think, with the old Intels. You can put a sticker on it, but I think that kind of spoils it slightly. The overall design and colours strike me as being very much like the first introduction of the iMac G3 way back in the late 90s, 98, 99 time. In fact, they even give you some retro desktop backgrounds with things like Happy Macs on them. And I think even the stock background that they show you in all the ads and everything reminds me of the Mac OS 9 default background, and you can access them all in your backgrounds on the thing. The white bezels do seem to worry people, but for me they're a throwback. So this thing looks modern, but it also looks vintage, and I actually quite like it, and I love the range of colours that's available. The lower spec iMac doesn't have quite as many colours, but they all look very nice. In terms of ancillaries, as I say, I've had to buy a couple of extra hard drives. I've also got just one that I haven't got backing up with Time Machine. It's a 6 terabyte old hard drive thing that I've basically reformatted and repurposed just as a place to dump bits of video footage and stuff like that, which might be handy to have one day, but I don't need to keep it for now. So it just gets dumped on there, and I'll take my chances and hope that the disk drive is not going to fail. Okay, I have, as I say, got another 8 terabyte Time Machine disk, which I can access, should I need anything sort of pre this new Mac. So everything's all backed up from before. I've got a lot of stuff backed up online, by the way. That 2 terabytes of iCloud storage that I've got has still got tons of room on it, because I'm saving JPEGs on there and not the full RAW files, which are going onto my drive down here. I have a wonderful system for knowing which disk drive is which, and it's the number of blobs of blue tack on it. It will only take a prankster to come and muck up my blue tack. And I've got blue tack underneath as well, sticking them to my table. I've had to get an ugly club boot thing with ports on it. They really don't, they just take away the kind of sleekness of the whole thing. The main Achilles heel that I'm going to say is the mouse. Here it is in that lovely blue colour, and it looks brilliant and it feels lovely to hold, etc. Unless you're actually using it as a mouse. It's very fussy about the surface that is good enough for it. I find scrolling up and down a chore with it. My Magic Trackpad is, more or less as in heaven. I mean, that was with my old iMac. And so I've kept it here, and the Bluetooth seems to be unreliable on it. Plus, it doesn't appear to want to hold a charge very much now either, which is a pain. It's a shame, because I absolutely loved using it. And, I do wish I'd specified the trackpad when I bought this thing. I didn't think I would need to, because I thought that, perhaps my old one would have a bit of life in it, but it really doesn't want to play. And so, sadly, it is with regret that for the moment I have to use the mouse, but, hopefully at some point I'll be able to get myself a trackpad. Right. What would I rate it, the iMac out of 10? I would rate it 8 out of 10. I'm knocking off points just for the insane amount that they cost once you get a usable spec. They look reasonably attractive on website as such, until you start adding the bits that are going to make it usable and are going to make it last for the 7 or 8 years maybe that you're going to get out of it. I knock another point off because the mouse. But that's all really. Everything else is just really, really good. Really good. Really enjoying it. And thank you very much, insurance company. All right. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, share if you dare. Consider a super thanks. I'll see you in the next video. All right. See you later.